The Jeffrey Epstein saga continues to dog Donald Trump, even as he tries to change the subject. First, his MAGA supporters turned against the Justice Department handling of Epstein and the files. And now Democrats are piling on, calling for Trump to release all of the Epstein files, assuming they exist, and trying to further divide Trump from his core supporters.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
How did a dead sex offender become such a problem for Donald Trump, and what can he do to get past it? That's our subject on Potomac Watch for today. I'm Paul Gigot of the Wall Street Journal opinion page, and I'm here with my colleagues Mene Ukwe-Barua and Kate Batchelder-Odell. Jeffrey Epstein died in prison in 2019, officially by suicide, but skeptics abound, and the conspiracy theory that he was killed in prison to protect powerful clients and his associates will not go away. It was fanned by Trump's allies for years and even by Trump himself on occasion. But now that these folks are in power, in particular at the Justice Department, they say there was no client list and that he really did commit suicide. Trump says, let's ignore it all. It's no big deal. But his base doesn't believe him. Joe Rogan, the podcaster, lacerated the president. Tucker Carlson as well. The conspiracy crowd that built its following on the mistrust of institutions and elites has now turned on Trump. Mene, why?
Well, I think that you mentioned it in that introduction. So much of this story had been hyped up by Donald Trump somewhat during the lead up to the 2024 election. He pledged on the campaign trail that he would revisit the case, the implication being that a lot of details were buried in the Justice Department and could be exposed so that the public would be able to review them. But much more than Donald Trump, you had folks like Dan Bongino, who Donald Trump named to be his deputy head of the FBI. He said repeatedly on his podcast in the lead up to 2024 that he had from credible sources that there was a client list, and he raised doubts about whether it was a suicide. Same thing with Kash Patel. So these guys are now inside the administration, have access to this information, and a lot of their followers wanted to see them follow through on their pledge to expose these details. But the problem is that the Justice Department seems to have actually already gone through a lot of this information, found out a lot of the wilder conspiracy theories about the Epstein case were not true. And so they're now in this position of trying to save face in front of their base, people who had hoped that they would be able to carry the story forward, expose a lot of potentially unsavory clients, but the information just doesn't really seem to be there.
Well, the implication here is that by the insinuation by the conspiracy theorists is that somehow there are details in there that would embarrass in these files, so-called, that would embarrass powerful people. And even Donald Trump, who, of course, there are photos of Donald Trump with Jeffrey Epstein that traveled in New York circles somewhat decades ago. Not surprising, given the way New York works. Let's listen to Trump talk about all this this week.
If a document is credible, if a document's there that is credible, she can release. I think it's good. But it's just a subject. He's dead. He's gone, and all it is the certain Republicans got duped by the Democrats, and they're following a Democrat playbook, and no different than Russia, and all the other hoaxes. They're started by the Democrats, and some Republicans. In this case, I was surprised, but they got duped.
Kate, duped and started by the Democrats. In this case, it really wasn't started by the Democrats. It was started by MAGA and Republicans.
Well, let me add one caveat to that. Let's go back to another political era known as back in Trump's first term. One of Trump's labor secretaries, Alex Acosta, was basically run out of town by the left for accusations that he was too soft on Epstein. And we wrote at the time that this was a terrible smear that was unfounded by the factual record, and that, in fact, Epstein had gone to jail because of Acosta's actions, and Epstein had had to register as a sex offender because of Acosta's involvement as a prosecutor. So there is some validity to the idea that Democrats did use this as an attack line, perhaps even first, but it's became sort of an intellectual lab leak that jumped to the MAGA right. And it is a testament to our horseshoe political theory times where there are left-right condominiums on some of these darker topics. I just think the enduring mushroom cloud of this story reflects poorly on almost everybody involved and is not a good moment for the country.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, you hate to even talk about it, but it's consumed much of Washington over the last week or so, so you almost can't avoid it. Alex Acosta, of course, before he was labor secretary, had been a prosecutor in U.S. attorney, I believe, in Miami when he prosecuted, or at least Southern Florida when he prosecuted Epstein.
Right. And it looked likely that Epstein might get off on a misdemeanor and not serve any jail time. And so were not for Acosta, that might have happened. But that is not the narrative. He was viewed as giving him a sweetheart deal and as not prosecuting him to the full extent, which I think was unfair.
So let's deal with this issue of the so-called client list. And we had an op-ed in our pages this week that was pretty instructive by Alan Dershowitz, he represented Epstein for a while. And here's what he wrote. Epstein never created a client list. The FBI interviewed alleged victims who named several clients. These names, and clients in quotes here, these names have been redacted. They should be disclosed, but the courts have ordered them sealed. I know who they are. They don't include any current office holders. We don't know whether the accusations are true. The courts have also sealed negative information about some of the accusers to protect them. That is, some of the accusers of Epstein, to protect them. So there is a potential privacy issue here, Monet, in releasing the files.
Right. I do think, first of all, with regard to the existence of a client list, Jeffrey Epstein was an extremely sophisticated criminal. That much is known. And so even if you believe that he was engaged in essentially a very large, widespread prostitution operation, it seems entirely believable that he didn't have all the names neatly documented in a file that could turn up in investigators' hands. And so that destroys the credibility of a lot of the people who claimed to have access to this client list or claimed that it existed when it seems not to have. But there is a secondary question of what these alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein told the Justice Department in some of these conversations they had during the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. As Alan Dershowitz mentioned in the op-ed, it seems as if several prominent people were named. And so the job of the Justice Department here is not to just go ahead and release these names just because somebody said that they were involved with them. The job of the Justice Department is to then investigate those claims, contact the people, try to see if there was anything credible or worth continuing to investigate. In this memo that the Justice Department recently released, they said that they didn't find any compelling evidence in those claims that merited a further investigation. And that's going to be surprising to a lot of people, understandably. So I do think that as the pressure continues on the Justice Department, their job is going to be essentially to explain, without violating the privacy either of these victims or of these people who were named, what it was that they did find when they investigated these further, why they didn't find anything to be worthy of continuing an investigation. Because in the end, most of the people who are worried about the Epstein case are not worried so much about Epstein. It's always been the implication that these other important individuals were ensnared in this criminal operation. So if the Justice Department doesn't think so, they can explain some of their process that led them to that conclusion.
Democrats, of course, are making a lot of this now that there's the split on the right. Let's listen to Ro Khanna. He's a congressman from California who has been very active in this talk on the House floor about what he wants.
We are going to get a vote again this afternoon. And I hope people will find the courage of a Republican like Ralph Norman, or a Republican like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or a Republican like Thomas Massey, or the many, many MAGA Republicans who are demanding the full release of the Epstein files. It's not a question just of Epstein. It's a question of trust in our democracy.
The easiest thing in politics is to call for transparency. I mean, who could possibly be against that? But we've already mentioned the potential privacy issues here. Speaker Mike Johnson, though, has also called early in the week for releasing the files. But the vote in the House to do that, I don't think it passed, Kate, the resolution in the House calling for that. And it really is down to a decision by the Justice Department. What do you make of how Democrats are playing this up?
Well, I think Democrats sense an opportunity here. I mean, the president had been talking about his successful Iran strikes, which is not unrelated to what we're talking about here, and the part of his base that is turning on him and trying to control what he does. But so I think Democrats saw an opening here to try to drive this conversation and continue making Trump talk about Epstein all day, every day, and to hoist up some of the MAGA influencers on their own petard. But two quick things, the Dershowitz op-ed, I commend everybody to read it because I think it's one of the only pieces that is added to what we know about Epstein as his lawyer. But he notes that some of the accusations, in addition to what we're talking about with privacy, are under court seal, and that journalists would need to petition to lift that seal. So that, again, is another example of it's not just the Justice Department. There are other safeguards here that the Justice Department can't just overrule that are just part of why the documents aren't going to come out.
I want to make this connection here, explain the point you made about the Iran bombing. Is your point that some of these mega critics of Trump on Epstein are basically upset about the fact that he bombed Iran when he said he didn't want to get into wars, and therefore this is since that went well, they have to drop that critique, and now they're jumping on this to be able to hit him on Epstein because they're so unhappy about other things?
That is a little more explicit than the connection I was trying to draw, but I think that there is a segment of the base that is losing its influence with Trump. It tried very hard to dissuade the president from striking Iran. It lost. Those strikes were successful, and I think it is trying to fire another shot across the bow on Epstein, and is trying to make this an issue and to show Trump that they get to say what MAGA means, and that they control and influence his coalition, and they speak to millions of people. So I do think it is a bit of a power play here on Trump.
I'd also add that a lot of those same people very much did not want Donald Trump to turn around and give weapons to Ukraine, which he did earlier this week, announced on Monday. This is the isolationist wing of the GOP, the modern GOP. Let's talk though about the president's how the president gets out of this, because it isn't obvious to me that unless it kind of goes away just from loss of interest, that there's an easy way out, Monet. Pam Bondi, in particular, the Attorney General, is taking a lot of heat. She didn't handle this well because earlier this year she had said, "Oh, well, I have these files in front of me." And then when the Justice Department came out with its statement saying, well, there was nothing really in the files, they said, "Oh, whoa, what's that contradiction?" Is Bondi going to take the fall here, either through losing her job or have to do something like release at least some of the documents?
I think it's going to have to be the latter. Frankly, I think that Trump has said Pam is doing a great job. He has said repeatedly that she is going about handling the Epstein case in the way that he would want. And so for him to then turn around and throw her under the bus would not reflect very well on him. But there's also the fact of the matter that even if Bondi were fired, Trump would have to appoint someone else to lead the Justice Department, and whatever the agency has or doesn't have on a Jeffrey Epstein would still be there. The pressure would still remain. It's not as if you have a scandal that happened in the past where somebody just has to take the fall for it, and then you can move forward and condemn that person. They have what they have. And so I do think that they are going to have to again, describe some of the process that they took to investigating the claims that the clients were making, and describe why it was that they didn't think that any of them were credible enough to warrant further investigation or enough even for these names to be released publicly, which is really what a lot of these MAGA influencers seem to want. They believe that there were extremely prominent individuals who were going to Epstein's Island and engaging in illicit activity there, think that there's a cover-up, and so the Justice Department should say how it was that they approached these claims and found that they did not live up to some of the wildest understandings of people who have been following the Epstein scandal for years.
Of course, if Bondi were sacked or resigned, Trump would have to name a replacement. And undoubtedly, one of the conditions, Kate, of confirmation would be, well, you'll, of course, release the Epstein files, won't you? Or I'm not going to vote for you. So that would be a real gauntlet to have to walk.
Well, and the problem is that transparency isn't going to quiet down the people invested in this theory. The problem is that when you put facts on the record, they pivot to other theories and it becomes unfalsifiable. I'll give you an example. Dershowitz op-ed says that he's confident that Epstein was not an agent of an intelligence service, which is another claim that has been going around. And he
Israel
says,
in particular, the
yes,
Mossad.
right. And Dershowitz says, I would know because his lawyers would have used that to get him a better deal. So that is a torpedo in the hull of that claim that he was working on behalf of an intelligence service. You also had Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, say, Mossad reported to me, I can confirm 100% that he was not connected to Israeli intelligence services. But that does not seem to quiet the belief in these views, and they continue to spread regardless of how many facts you put on the record.
There's an illogic to conspiracy theorists, Monet, which is that once you knock down one false claim, there's always another one. There's always another document that hasn't been released. There's always another witness who hasn't, who's been quieted allegedly. There's always something else. In the case of the Epstein suicide claim, there's a tape that the Justice Department released, and it has a gap of, I guess, a minute. I've seen 3 minutes. I haven't seen the tape myself, but it has a gap at one point, and this is for a lot of the skeptics. Aha! There it is. That's when somebody slipped into his cell and killed him. When the Justice Department says it's actually just a technical glitch of when a turnover in the cameras was done.
Yeah, well, part of the problem with the conspiracy theories about Epstein's death, as with all other conspiracy theories, JFK, you name it, essentially the people who are proposing the conspiracy theory don't have to actually offer their own counter theory of what took place or how. Having somebody sneak into Jeffrey Epstein's cell and conduct his murder while it's all on videotape seems like an extremely difficult, if not impossible, thing to do. And yet the people who are saying with certainty that this took place don't have to offer any kind of logical theory about how this happened. They just have to be able to point to one little hole in the official narrative and say, okay, wow, now it's not definitive. You guys haven't proved it. It's the same thing with the client list. It's the same thing with many different the allegation that he was an asset of Mossad. All of these things, there is no actual theory put forward for how these took place, how they've been kept secret. They can only point to the inability of the Justice Department to conclusively say that these things didn't take place. And so there's essentially no convincing people once they've bought into one of these conspiracy theories.
Another idea, Kate, to suggestion for Trump is to name a special counsel to look into this. It would be part of the Justice Department, I assume, because that's what the counsels usually do. My own view of this is that it is a bad idea. It would just bury the story while the counsel had to basically go in and dig into the story for months and probably to the same end. And then when the counsel reports, well, here's what I didn't find, if that's what happens, nobody would believe him anyway.
Yeah, and special counsels, when have they ever gone wrong for Trump, right? I mean, the idea of appointing somebody whose basic existence would keep this story alive for months and years to come, and at the end, whether we would know anything more than we do today from Alan Dershowitz is not obvious to me. The one last thing that I thought was interesting in the Dershowitz piece was that it's possible, to his mind, that perhaps Epstein had assistance in killing himself, and that there are some questions about not the tape, but why he didn't have a cellmate, or other things there. But that's separate from a conspiracy about someone coming in and murdering him. I think Trump's only option here is to continue to cut loose the loud online voices who are peddling this stuff. I think he has to make pretty clear that they don't represent his coalition, or is just going to continue to hound him in the months to come.
Well, and if he does that, he's essentially saying you either drop this issue, Monet, or you're not with the team. And so far, a lot of the loyalists are, in fact, doing that. Charlie Kirk, Turning Point Action, has already said, I'm shutting up about this. I trust my president. Steve Bannon, in his ever protean way, will find a way to come back on the Trump team. And I suspect that'll be most of what will happen with most of them.
I think so. I think that you can draw a distinction between this and the previous fight that Kate alluded to over Iran and whether Trump should attack it. I do think that Trump certainly had the stronger of that argument, but that was a legitimate policy dispute about which direction the government should go. It made sense that there would be some people, an isolationist wing in his following, who Trump did at some times cater to during his campaign, saying, I want to retreat and I want to make sure the U.S. doesn't get involved in any wars. And so that civil war within the MAGA movement made a certain amount of sense. And I think Trump would be willing to say, I'm going to let bygones be bygones there, despite having taken some harsh criticism from some people who had backed him very strongly. With regard to the Epstein case, it's much more in the realm of conspiracy theories, and the people who are making these claims do not have access to any of the information that Trump's staff, who are actually in the Justice Department and the FBI, have. And so, again, we have to reiterate that Trump did fan these flames by suggesting that the client list might exist or that he would reveal this information. But in the end, it makes perfect sense to me that he has no patience for people who are continuing to attack him entirely based on conspiracy theories at this point, and is going to try to suppress the influence that they have among his followers.
All right, I'm going to pull an old tactic from the McLaughlin group. And if there is no bombshell, no new bombshell, no new disclosure that somehow would damage any individuals in the White House or in the Trump circle or the president himself, how much long-term damage does this episode do on a scale from 1 to 10, Kate? 1 being no damage, and 10 being impeachable damage.
Well, remember, the Dershowitz op-ed says that he's seen no wrongdoing by Trump, and that Trump banned him from his club, banned Epstein from his club long before he became president, and he doesn't know of any wrongdoing by Trump. And so that puts me lower on the damage scale. Let's give it a 4.
Monet.
I might go even lower than that. I would say 3. I think that this is a story that punches above its weight in the media because a lot of journalists and a lot of online influencers are very interested in it. But across the country as a whole, there's a certain amount of interest, but I think that people will move on to the next thing. And to echo Kate's point about Trump not having direct exposure to this, I think the idea that the Justice Department during the Biden administration years was sitting on a list in which Donald Trump was implicated and did not act on that, but the Biden administration that was taking every possible legal move to damage Trump and his reputation, if they knew that he had any connection to it, they surely would have found a way to act on that, get it unsealed. And so we can be quite confident that Donald Trump isn't implicated in the evidence that the Justice Department has. At least that's my 2 cents.
Well, I'm going for a 2, and maybe less, mainly because this assumes there's no big big bombshell news that's been buried. But because I just think the stakes are so low. This is a guy who died in 2019, and it doesn't affect the average American in any particular way what happens one way or another. It's basically a story about trust in institutions, a failing trust in institutions. And that's a larger story that is a larger problem that we have to deal with and leads to so many of these conspiracy theorists. But I don't think this is all that damaging to Trump as it stands now. So I'm going to leave my esteemed colleagues, Kate Batchelder Odell and Monet Ukwe Barua. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for listening. We're here every day on Potomac Watch. Hope to see you tomorrow.